The Dyatlov Pass incident. Russia's frozen mystery. In late January of 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers set out on an ambitious winter expedition into the northern Ural Mountains, a remote and unforgiving region of what was then the Soviet Union. Their goal was to complete a ski trek that would earn them the highest level of hiking certification available at the time. Grade 3, a mark of elite endurance and skill. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, now known as Yekaterinburg. Dyatlov was respected, methodical, and known for careful planning. He was not reckless. Every member of the group had extensive experience in long-distance winter travel, many of them having survived far harsher conditions than most civilians would ever face. Among the 9 hikers was Semyon Zolotayev. Zolotayev stood out immediately. Older than the others, and a decorated World War II veteran, he joined the group at the last moment, replacing a member who had fallen ill. His presence would later fuel intense speculation. On January 27th, 1959, the group departed by train. Spirits were high. They sang songs, joked, and kept detailed diaries. Photographs were taken during the early days of the trek show smiling faces, relaxed expressions, and no sign of fear or tension. None of them knew they would never return. The northern Urals are not dramatic mountains by global standards, but they are brutally deceptive. Winds can exceed hurricane force. Temperatures routinely plunge below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Visibility can vanish in moments. On January 31st, the hikers reached the edge of the last inhabited settlement, a small logging outpost known as Vijay. From there, they entered true wilderness. That same day, they cached excess food and supplies in a wooded valley, intending to retrieve them on the return journey. This was standard procedure and indicated confidence in success. On February 1st, weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. Strong winds and blowing snow reduced visibility. Navigation became difficult. Evidence suggests the group veered off their intended route and began ascending the eastern slope of Syakhl. Kholat Syakhl was a mountain whose name in the local Mansi language translate ominously as Dead Mountain. Despite the worsening conditions, Dyatlov chose to camp on the slope rather than descend back into the shelter of the forest below. This decision would later be scrutinized endlessly, though at the time it may have seemed logical. Descending and reascending the next day would have cost valuable time and energy. That night, they pitched their tent on an exposed incline, cutting into the snow to stabilize it against the wind. This was the last normal decision they would ever make. Something happened during the night of February 1st to February 2nd, 1959. What exactly occurred remains unknown. What is known comes from the physical evidence discovered weeks later, and that evidence tells a story unlike any other mountaineering tragedy on record. At some point after midnight, the hikers cut their way out of their tent from the inside. This detail is critical. The tent was found partially collapsed, slashed open with long, deliberate cuts. The entrance flap was intact. There was no sign of an external attacker forcing entry. Inside were boots, coats, gloves, food, money, documents, and cameras. Items no experienced hiker would willingly abandon extreme cold. Yet the hikers fled. Barefoot. In socks, in underwear, they ran downhill into darkness, wind, and sub-zero temperatures. Whatever they were escaping, they believed it was more dangerous than freezing to death. When the group failed to return by their scheduled date, initial delays were dismissed as typical for winter expeditions. But by February 20th, relatives demanded action. Search parties were organized, including fellow students, volunteers, police, and eventually the military. On February 26th, the abandoned tent was discovered. It was eerily quiet. The tent stood partially buried in snow, its fabric torn open from within. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading to the tent. But there were footprints leading away. 9 distinct sets. They descended the slope calmly at first, walking, not running, toward a forest approximately 1.5 kilometers away. This detail contradicted panic. It suggested confusion or controlled fear. At the edge of the forest stood a large cedar tree. Beneath it, searchers found the first 2 bodies. They were barefoot, dressed only in underwear. Their hands were burned, and fragments of skin were found between their teeth. Evidence they had gnawed at themselves, possibly in terminal hypothermia. A small fire had been lit beneath the tree, its remnants barely visible. The branches of cedar were broken up to 5 meters high, as though someone had climbed desperately upward, perhaps trying to see the tent, or escape something below. Between the cedar tree and the tent lay 3 more bodies, including Dyatlov. They were spaced out in a line, as if attempting to return to the tent. All three died of hypothermia. One of them, however, had a fractured skull, minor but unexplained. There were no signs of combat, no defensive wounds, no footprints other than the group's own. Four hikers remained unaccounted for. One of these included Semyon Zolotayev. Search efforts intensified as spring approached and snow began to melt. On May 4th, 1959, their bodies were found in a ravine deeper within the forest, buried under several meters of snow. What investigators discovered there transformed a tragic accident into a legend. The four hikers in the ravine displayed severe internal injuries. One suffered massive skull fractures. Another had crushed rib cages. One was missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her lips. Two were dressed in pieces of clothing belonging to others, suggesting post-mortem redistribution for warmth. These injuries were compared by medical examiners to the force of a car crash. Yet, there were no external wounds, no signs of a fall from height, no avalanche debris, no evidence of an attack. The official autopsy concluded the injuries were caused by an unknown compelling force. Even more unsettling, some clothing showed elevated levels of radiation. The Soviet investigation was swift and oddly incomplete. Witnesses reported strange orange lights in the sky during the same period. These testimonies were recorded, then quietly ignored. The case was closed in May 1959, with a final statement declaring that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. No further explanation was offered. Files were classified. Families were discouraged from asking questions. The area was closed to hikers for 3 years. Over the decades, theories multiplied. Avalanche, military weapons testing, infrasound-induced panic, winds, secret parachute mines, UFO encounters, Mansi tribal attacks, which were later disproven. Each theory explains some elements, but never all. Avalanche theory struggles to explain the intact tent and lack of debris. Military testing fails to explain why civilians were present without warning. Psychological explanations fail to account for the physical trauma. The mystery persists because the evidence contradicts itself. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. In 2020, they officially ruled the deaths the result of an avalanche. Many experts disagreed. Computer simulations suggested the slope was marginally unstable, but still failed to explain why the tent was cut open, why injuries were localized, or why radiation was present. The modern conclusion answered the question of how they died, but not why they fled. The Dyatlov Pass has since become a place of pilgrimage. Visitors describe an unsettling quiet, a feeling of absence, a sense that something ended here, but never fully left. The mountain still bears its Mansi name, Dead Mountain. 9 skilled hikers entered the Urals confident and prepared. 9 never returned. And more than 60 years later, the night of February 1st, 1959, remains frozen in mystery. Its truth buried beneath snow, silence, and unanswered questions.